everyone, and welcome back to Breaktime Conversations, a YouTube channel where I have conversations around education. I have been a teacher almost all of my life, and education fascinates me. And along this journey of mine, I have met so many interesting and inspiring people. And so I decided to document my conversations with them here so that you too can hear their stories and the amazing work that they do. I'm here today with Arvind Murali, somebody I met very, very recently. He has a very inspiring story, which he can share probably at another time. But he is the founder of Bamboo Labs, and he's in the business of building tools that empower teachers to use technology to enhance their students' learning experience. Arvind, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Anupam.
So while we were chatting earlier, you were talking about intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation. And I have to say upfront that I really don't know much about this. So I'm just going to give you the mic and ask you to tell us all about this and what it means.
For sure. Yeah, so I don't claim to be an expert myself either, but the basic difference between these two sides is intrinsic motivation is what comes from within the student or the learner, right? Like each student is motivated by a variety of things, their interests in certain topics or their interests in certain crafts that can be then leveraged to help them learn better. And so the idea is for a lot of educators that promote tapping into intrinsic motivation of students and how that could be an effective way for you to get students to pay attention. Ultimately, that's where it all boils down, is trying to get children to pay attention to whatever is being taught. And one of the ways is to tap into their intrinsic motivation. Now, the extrinsic motivation is where a lot of the more recent work in terms of gamification, in terms of trying to provide badges motivate them from an external source, something that innately that they wouldn't have. But now that it's a race, I'm going to fight for this. And now that it's a competition, I'm going to do more than other students and so on, right? So it's a very different way of looking at it. And there's, a lot of arguments of like anybody that goes into internet in the education space are going to like fall into one of these buckets. And everybody has rightfully, strongly held opinions, and like they've all have great examples for both of them. And so that's fundamentally the difference between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation.
Okay, awesome. It makes sense now. So I think maybe people from my generation, we didn't have too much we didn't have technology. The TV, I think, just about came out when we were kids. So we probably had more intrinsic motivation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Cool. So what has made you think about this so much? Because I even saw a LinkedIn post of yours talking about this. So what is bringing on these thoughts?
Right. So as a founder, basically like the kinds of tools that we're building at Bamboo are tools that are fundamentally focused at increasing student engagement. That is our North Star metric. That's why we exist. That's where we want to be relevant. And so as we try to build tools in the space that, like how do I get children to be more engaged in the content that teachers are putting together? We started thinking about like, how do we get children and, how does it scale? If we need to start tapping into intrinsic motivation of different students, each of them have a variety and unique perspective, unique interests. And so then how do you scale it across thousands, if not millions of students? And, how do you know what are the right ways to motivate each child, right? It starts becoming a really complex issue for which like there isn't a very straightforward solution, but it's worth solving, because if you can tap into somebody's own interests, they would take the additional effort that it takes to do whatever they want to do, right? So your job then would not be to say, get them to finish their homework. It would be to just keep giving them resources for them to go do the homework, and they're going to keep asking you for, hey, can I learn more about this? I love learning more about this. Can I go for an excursion, study a field trip or whatever? Like that is how involved kids could be. I mean, kids are extremely curious and motivated. So it's a very powerful thing to work, and it's worth thinking about. But then from a scalability perspective, obviously extrinsic motivation is one of the easiest or one of the most scalable ways. Like, I can repeat it across thousands, if not millions of students. And I know when children are given badges, they are honored and they want to, like, do their best, put their best foot forward when they're trying to earn something that they treasure themselves, right? And so a lot of the internet over the last couple of years has moved in this direction. People want their blue ticks on their Twitter accounts, and they want. So all of this is a like or a share on a Facebook page, or subscribe on a YouTube page. All of these are extrinsic motivators innately, right? So we are trying to figure out, in the context of education, what is the combination of these things, and what are the right kinds of ways for us to promote both of these things. And ultimately, it boils down to what is more impactful, what has a step change in learning outcome. And that's fundamentally what we're trying to solve for. So that's why it's become something that I've spent a lot of hours thinking about. So that's how it's in the conversation right now.
That's really interesting. I think everything we do now requires an extrinsic motivation. It's such a tongue twister for me.
Right.
So, okay, so this tool that you are developing and that you're working on,
Mhm.
I know it's a tool to empower teachers and to enhance. So, what exactly? So, I've been having this conversation a lot
Mhm.
of late. What is the role of the teacher then? If the child is going to be
Mhm.
totally into this tool and looking for those
Mhm.
badges and everything, what would the role of the teacher be then?
Right. No, I think that's a brilliant question, and that's a question I think all educators should ask on a daily basis before when they're evaluating tools. With what Bamboo is doing, it is entirely teacher first, right? Like the platform itself is purely tailor-made to teachers, and teachers are the decision makers in terms of what is the right content. Like, if a student logged in on their own, like we're working on self-discovery, like for students and teachers to just find our platform online and create their own accounts and start using. We don't even allow students to just create an account for themselves. We ask that teachers include them into their classrooms. Reason being, for us, everything has to be like, it doesn't make sense. I mean, I don't know the child on the other side of the table. And so I don't really know what's the best way to teach a child. And so for that reason, what we do is we don't focus on trying to build a lot of content. There's plenty of content out there for a motivated child, for a child that has intrinsic motivation. They're going to be able to find a ton of content on YouTube, on Wikipedia, wherever they go. The role of the teacher itself is knowing where to do the scaffolding, right? There's an entire perspective around teaching where it's not just about giving them the free will to go learn whatever they want. It's also knowing when they are going out of the scope and starting to distract themselves or going down a rabbit hole that they're not prepared for. And these are all things that teachers have already been doing on a consistent basis for so many centuries, right? And so a lot of the challenges that we are seeing now is that edtech companies, or companies that have come out with solutions that are direct to parent, direct to student, are taking that role upon themselves to decide the best way to teach child. And that's fundamentally something that we don't think is the best way to do it, right? So, and that is where we see the role of the teacher is. We still think they're central to how a child's learning, because even if we took the best teachers in the world, and Salman Khan from Khan Academy, they do brilliant work across the board, and we think of them as one of the most inspirational educators and in the right mission to serve the world. But we also think that it is probably not the best video for every child. It's a great video for most children, but for every child, like a child that might have a better understanding if the explanation was in their own vernacular language, for example, or if some teachers do raps here in the US and try to connect to their children that way. So their own teacher's ability to understand their child is more valuable to us than our ability to give you some kind of a content that you could just project to the child. And so that's why we put teachers in the center of this. and we want teachers to be empowered. And so we, like, on a daily basis, our content is basically just teachers creating new things on the platform, and our role is to make it easier for them to do that, and also to make it more engaging for the student to consume that content. And so we've kind of like put ourselves inside this box where we're not stepping into the academician's shoes. We don't want to tell you how to teach something or what's the right content to teach. What we'll do is you tell me what's the right content. And then as a child is consuming that content, as okay, like for example, we do something called a social blackboard. A teacher, most typically in India, writes a lot on the blackboard. And so for us, we don't need to be dictating what should be written on the blackboard. But if we could give them a tool to just capture a picture of that, and that becomes a canvas on which conversations can happen, that is what we do, right? We enable that conversations to happen contextually. And our innovation comes in the form of creating an inclusive space. We have anonymous comments, for example. And so where children can ask a question or clarify doubts without revealing to their friends who they are. It gives them that security to ask it. That's where we've sort of like kept our space, and like we don't want to encroach into teachers' domain. We think teaching should remain in the hands of the teachers, and we should try to enable, or basically our platform is dictated by what teacher needs. And over time, that's where we want to grow.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah. So that totally answers my question. So the teacher is still in charge and is still king of her little kingdom.
Absolutely.
And yeah, that's awesome. So that was one observation. Another observation was, so you explain whatever how you explained Bamboo Labs, is that how it makes you different from any other edtech company?
Right.
So you're allowing the teacher to use your tool to make the learning experience better.
Right. Exactly. So we are sort of closer to learning management systems than we are to content providers, independent content providers. And so a lot of learning management systems, including Google Classroom and like other tools that are out there, have all been doing this for a while, and teachers have had access to this. Where we saw the gap fundamentally was that these systems are being used as a dumping yard for content. Like people would come in, I've created this presentation, or there's a YouTube video I want you to watch. I'm going to just dump all this content in a place and then like just send out a link to my children, or they get notified. And then kids go in. The experience is basically uninspiring, right? Like, I don't want to just sit down and read a presentation, or like, because these are kids, right? Like, these are not adults sitting in a conference room trying to work on their companies. These are kids. And so, the experience needs to give them something rewarding. There needs to be multifocal touch points for children to engage with the content as opposed to just passively consuming it. So that's one piece. The second piece is it's also not social. I mean, if we go back and think about the primary challenge over the last 2 years, I mean, like finances, like health scares, everything apart, the primary reason kids couldn't learn as effectively outside of classrooms was that they were lonely. Kids could not connect with their friends. For a lot of kids, the whole reason we go to a school was because I get to hang out with my children, friends, and there's a lot of value in social learning. And so that was another huge disconnect in a lot of learning management systems, where the setup was not as friendly to have a social experience like you would do on a Facebook or a LinkedIn or an Instagram, right? Like kids are very active on Snapchat and LinkedIn and Instagram, but it comes with a whole range of other problems when you go to those spaces, right? It's all like open to the public, it's not protected, there's safety concerns. So what we tried to do is create this safe and secure atmosphere within a platform that only brings in teachers and students from their own classroom. And so it's a very isolated, closed group. And the content on the platform is dictated by the teacher. So it's the most relevant way for them to learn, the most harmonious way for them to learn. But then as they read through their questions, as they, read through a blackboard that was written just a few hours ago in my own class, I'm now able to engage with it by asking a question. And hey, I generally don't even raise my hands in class, but now that I have this tool, I can maybe ask a question anonymously, and I feel less pressured to keep it to myself because my friends are not going to start ridiculing me. Hey, do you not even know? So that is where we see this difference. That's why we are stepping ourselves a little away from existing learning management tools and going into more about how do we get children to be engaged with this content? Because teachers are taking a lot of effort. It's still teacher driven. And so it's still something that teachers have to put an effort into. And so that's where we're trying to sidestep this and say, hey, our focus needs to be on providing the easiest way for teachers to create content. And parallelly, the focus needs to be on the best way. I mean, children should look forward to. For example, one of the things we do is a game. I think like the last time we talked about it, I showed you the game. Basically, like you could think of it as Mario, but then as you're playing the game, the teachers have picked a few questions for you, and those questions appear inside it. And then there's four mushrooms with four options, and you have to pick the right mushroom. That's the experience, right? Now, this is where we can get back into that extrinsic motivation. Kids are doing this a lot more because of how fun the game is, and it's building that muscle memory. So we're starting to give them incentives for them to learn. And so that's how all of this is coming up. And that's where we're starting to sidestep from existing learning management tools.
Lovely. Wonderful explanation, Arvind. Thank you so much. And I love how the teacher can still continue to be creative, because I've often wondered, like, when I started my teaching career, there was nothing. There was really nothing. If you worked in a school that had a decent library, at least you could refer to some books, or you relied on your own creativity, which was sometimes zero,
Right.
or, experienced teachers around
Mhm.
you. And teachers today have so much access to everything right at their fingertips. So
Right.
I often wonder whether, they would actually learn to be creative, or, are they just taking things off the internet? Anyway, so I love your tool, and I hope that, you reach many, many kids and teachers with the help of your tool.
Thank you.
So, Arvind, as we come to the end of our conversation, just want to ask you, I know you made this huge shift. You didn't study education or to be an educator, but
Mhm.
you've made this big shift into the education sector. So,
Right.
what has been your biggest learning so far?
I think as coming in, I assumed that there's an alignment in the priorities for every stakeholder within this ecosystem, starting from school owners, starting from teachers and students and parents and all these people. So I thought everybody wanted the exact same things, and to a large extent, they all do, right? Like everybody wants their kids, like, and teachers look at their students as their own kids, so everybody wants the kids to do well. The difference I've seen and what I've learned over the last couple of years is that what each individual stakeholder thinks is the best way to do that is drastically different. That is what has been like a very revelationary thing for me over the last couple of years. So for me to start understanding the priorities and the right approaches for different stakeholders, like what a school owner is concerned, is still ultimately the outcome for the child, and to be able to bring up successful children across the board in their class. But then they can't afford to prioritize that as number one, because they can't now pay the rent for their school building, or like they can't run their school buses anymore. So everything is all interconnected. And so it has been a learning experience for me to understand what the different stakeholders want, even though our ultimate aims, and external providers like us, right? Like we're bringing in a technology company, and we want to be a partner in this. And so I can't come in assuming that my way is going to be the best way that all of these people are going to line up on. So that's been really revolutionary for me. And so now I'm starting to better understand what individual stakeholders want and how best to serve them, because all of our goals are ultimately the same thing, right? And so that's been the biggest thing that I've learned that I did not know coming into education.
And I'm sure there will be many more learnings along the way,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, I thank you for these kinds of conversations, which is what helps me sort of
Oh,
understand a lot of things that I did not know. So,
thanks,
yeah,
Arvind. It
I
has
really
been
thank you.
such a pleasure interacting with you over the past few days. And thank you for being here today. And more power to you as you learn and
Thank
grow
you.
and develop your tool. All the best,
My
Arvind. Thank
pleasure.
you once again.
Thank you, Anupa. It was lovely talking to you. Have a
Bye
great
for
day.
now.
Bye.